Hello, friends. Molly Pompidith here, CEO of the SOAR Community Network and co-founder of the SOAR Community Nebula. Our goal is to bring to you 1,000 champions of change and community builders. And today I'm delighted to bring to you Elisa Kosarin. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, thank you, Molly. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Well, we recently met you, and it felt like I met you many, many years ago because we connected so well.
Yes.
We recently met you, and you were presenting on this awesome topic of volunteerism and how volunteers are so incredible and amazing in the world of nonprofits. And today I want to highlight that because we're talking about community builders and champions of change. And I would like for you to reintroduce yourself to our audience now and let us know what you're currently working on in the world.
Yes. Well, again, I'm Elisa Kosarin, and I call my business 20 Hats. I'm a volunteer engagement specialist, which means that I help nonprofits and the volunteer managers within nonprofits fully cultivate their volunteers and develop really strong volunteer programs so that they can deliver more on their mission, and also so that they can raise more money. Mally, the workshop where I met you was all about that very question, which was how to cultivate that volunteer relationship so that individual becomes a supporter in other ways of the organization through advocacy, financially, in whatever way is meaningful to them.
That's great. Why did you choose to focus on this? I mean, you could have chosen 1,000 different ways to support nonprofits and business leaders. Why is this so important?
Yeah, good question. Well, it certainly comes from my background. Most of my professional career has been in the nonprofit fields. I started out in development as a fundraiser, but about a dozen years ago, I made a shift. And I actually took some time off from work and to reflect and figure out what I wanted to do next as my professional next step. And during that time, I heard about the CASA program, the Court Appointed Special Advocates program. If any of your listeners are familiar with that, it's a program where volunteers advocate for abused and neglected children in the court system. And I couldn't believe, number one, that the court system would allow volunteers to take on such a responsibility, but they do. And having that volunteer, unpaid voice advocating for a child with no other agenda other than the child's best interests is incredibly powerful. Mm-hmm. So I became a CASA volunteer, loved it, realized how much one individual in a volunteer role can actually change the course of a child's life, and was so fascinated by my volunteer role and the potential of volunteers that when a position became open at CASA to recruit and train volunteers, I took that position. So I was with my CASA program for 8 years, and then I was ready for a shift. I was ready to not be working in an office anymore. I love training. I love writing about the volunteer role. So I shifted into creating my own business to do training and consulting around volunteer management and best practices.
That's so great.
Yeah.
Well, the next question I have is having you talk a little bit about your personal journey around mindful, thoughtful leaders in your life, people who have perhaps gone out of their way to show you some extra love and compassion or support, and maybe even share one or two anecdotes that you're proud of, that you'd like to highlight, and feature someone who has really helped shift you in a profound way.
It's such a good question. You know, some of the most influential leaders for me have been the CEOs that I've worked with at nonprofits who have always championed me and believed in me and encouraged me to go further. And so I give a lot of credit to the executive director at my CASA program who really believed in me more than I believed in myself. And often would throw opportunities my way that I thought were things I couldn't possibly do. And probably the most significant one was that We focus quite a bit on our program and how to recruit and train volunteers effectively so that we could bring in advocates who would not drop their cases or in any way be detrimental to the children they were working with. And so we did come up with a very effective system. And at one point, my executive director said, we should really present on this at a conference. And I thought, oh, there's no way. I really thought this isn't important enough. We don't have enough to share. I've never presented at a conference. How are we going to do this? But we went ahead and we submitted a proposal that was accepted. I worked with our team to come up with a group presentation. It was very well received. And I realized it was so doable. And that was actually in many ways the beginnings of my business. When I realized that, I could work on a much bigger stage. And so now I present at national conferences all the time, among other things, run webinars. I get my voice out there in as many ways as possible. And it really came from a leader who believed more in me than I did in myself.
I love that.
Yeah.
That. Well, that leads us into the very next question, which is when you have gone around the country or even in your backyard doing what you do, and you surround yourself with champions of change and community builders, what are some of the attributes that you've seen consistently show up and the ones that you most admire?
I would say, I blog once a month about volunteer management. And even though most of my work is consulting with leaders in nonprofits, my blog is directed to the volunteer managers because they're the people on the ground, the boots on the ground, who are actually connecting with the volunteers, engaging them, bringing them into the programs and building those relationships. So I would say my champions are those volunteer managers. One thing that's unusual about my blog is that I oftentimes feature these volunteer managers in my blog posts, which I don't see happening very much out there. Because what I found is that just about every volunteer manager has some kind of innovative practice that they can share with the world, even though they don't think so. So in a way, it's similar to my executive director who believed in me. I believe in them in a way that sometimes they don't yet believe in themselves. And I feature their amazing work in my blog, which is read nationally and by volunteer managers in other countries as well. So I would say that the champions I'm most impressed with are these volunteer managers who are they're such believers in the power of volunteerism, and they see it and understand it in a way that is profound and not always fully understood by leadership. And so my goal is to sort of elevate them so that their voices can be heard and so that we can shift the conversation around how volunteers can be used in organizations.
Mm-hmm. Where can people find out about your blog? I'll just throw that in there because that sounds so fascinating.
Yes, absolutely. They can go to my website, which is 20hats.com, and that is spelled, it's the word 20 and the word hats, all spelled out, no dots or spaces in between.
Great, great. Okay, so my next question is, how are you utilizing your gifts, your talents, your life experiences to advance other causes forward? And the second part to that question is, what other causes, movements, or initiatives would you like to feature and where you spend a lot of your energy and time?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've come to realize that there is no one cause that is driving me. What drives me really is strengthening the community. I'm very community focused. And so that's why I feel so comfortable in my current role, where I'm helping many nonprofits to become stronger, more robust, by utilizing volunteers in ways that they had not considered. Because to me, that is the best way to, number one, strengthen our entire community, because these nonprofits deliver such important services to us. And also, it's a way to connect the community with the cause. Volunteering is probably, of all the ways that a person can get engaged with a cause or a nonprofit, volunteering is probably the most powerful. And Mally, you heard a little bit of this at the presentation you attended. That's because when you volunteer, when you actually come into an organization and start to do the work of the organization, you are able to experience in a very direct way how this nonprofit is making a difference in the community, or nationally, or internationally. You get to know the clients, you get to know the staff, and probably most important, you start to feel like you belong. And so being able to facilitate and strengthen that kind of relationship in all these different nonprofits, I feel like is probably my strength, and certainly my goal in the work I do.
Well, you know, when we talk about businesses, we talk a lot about purchasing power. But when we talk about volunteers, we don't often talk about their donation power, their funding power. So, and I know that was a very wonderful, not quite shocking, but definitely pleasantly surprising when you shared some stats around the contributions that volunteers make over the long haul. So I'd love for you to spend at least another minute on that, because I think that is very compelling, the actual data that supports how much volunteers offer to your nonprofit beyond their energy and their spirit and their time.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm glad you mentioned that to you it was not surprising, because I think that's true. It's something that's not surprising. Maybe in the back of our heads we know this, but we haven't really reflected on it. What the data shows, what the research shows, is that when it comes to philanthropic giving in a nonprofit, volunteers are 10 times more likely to donate than donors who are not volunteers. Or 10 times more generous, excuse me, I want to get that correct.
Right.
And then of the volunteers who do give philanthropically, 2/3 of their philanthropic giving is going to be directed towards the organizations where they volunteer. So a nonprofit has a huge incentive to be cultivating their volunteers in just about every meaningful way and deepening those connections with them so that they very much feel like a part of their organizations.
Right.
Yeah.
I always chuckle when I think about this, because I often think about the times when we go out and we volunteer. And
Yes.
we always get suckered in, and I mean that in the most loving way, get suckered into like writing a bigger check, you know.
Right.
We volunteered our time and our treasures and our insights, but every time we go to an event, there it is, pulling at our heartstrings. We're like, oh, we gotta get money. So
that's right.
You know, it is a very human thing, because we're already invested. We already believe in the mission.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you for sharing that, Mally. I think that's a great example, is that when we volunteer, we see what a great organization we're working with. The energy of the event, also elevates us. And then, of course, our natural inclination to be generous kicks in, and that generosity feels good.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question now is not just about all the warm, fuzzy feelings that we have when we volunteer and spend time in nonprofit, but just in life in general, there are challenges that we all face. And one of the questions that I love most in this interview series is getting everyone's insights and perspective on what empowers them, what keeps them motivated and going. Because as you can imagine, when you're out to save the world in your own unique way, how do you get refueled and re-energized when sometimes you're just not in a good mood, or life is throwing some things at you right now? So is there a philosophy, a motto, or a quote that you can share with us that helps you?
That is such a good question. Well, certainly in the most general sense, I do believe strongly that, when your energy is low or you're feeling discouraged, you really do have to believe that the universe is there behind you, and is your partner and your ally in helping you reach your goals. So always working to reconnect with those goals is probably your best motivator. Getting back to your purpose. You did ask for a quote, and it's funny because there's one that I just shared recently on my Facebook page. For volunteer managers, it's a quote that's been floating around Facebook by Warren Buffett. And the reason I like it is because it's about something that often sinks us, which is reactivity. That's something that I find is a very common challenge for the volunteer managers that I work with. Nonprofits, because they're under-resourced, because Staff members are often pulled in multiple directions at once and have quite a lot to do, end up working in very reactive environments and feeling reactive themselves. So here's the quote. You will continue to suffer if you have an emotional reaction to everything that is said to you. True power is sitting back and observing things with logic. True power is restraint. If words control you, that means everyone else can control you. Breathe and allow things to pass.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that. That's the first time we've heard that on the series. And
Oh, really?
really cool. Yes.
It is very cool, isn't it?
It's very cool. And sometimes when you hear these quotes and they kind of hit you exactly when you need them, and some of them are just so simple. Some of them are one-liners, and you think, well, that's common sense. But really, it's these quotes, these mottos, these philosophies that help ground us, they're so profound because they tap into something deep within us that reminds us everything is going to be okay. You have to trust, you have to release, you have to let go, and nothing stays the same, right? Everything changes.
Yes, yes, isn't that true?
That is.
That's true.
Well, can you share with us, if you can imagine or reimagine a better world, what would it look like through your eyes?
Oh my gosh, a better world. Well, certainly from my perspective, it would be one in which the power of volunteers was valued universally. Currently, I don't find that true. I find I spend a lot of my time explaining to nonprofit leaders why they need to focus on the volunteer side of their organizations. So certainly my better world would be a world in which, number one, everyone volunteered. Everyone felt that it was important to do so and found a way to do so that is meaningful to them. And then on the flip side of it, the organizations in which they volunteer truly at a very deep level value that contribution because they realize that it is the best method for bringing the community into the organization so that it's not just the nonprofit solving the problem, it's the entire community.
That would be a better world.
It would.
So how can our community support you right now? What are one or two ways that we can really support you in your mission? And what's the best way to connect with you?
The best way to connect with me is certainly through my blog. Reading my posts, commenting on them, very important. If anyone wants to email me, I would love to hear from listeners. And my email address is Elisa, which is ELISA @20hats.com. So it would be great to hear from folks that way as well.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today and for your commitment to volunteer engagement and to community engagement.
Well, thank you, Mally, and thank you for creating this SOAR community, which is amazing. And I have no doubt you're going to reach your 1,000 interviews.
Thank you for that trust and that belief. You're working really hard on it.
I can see.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate you. I appreciate your work. And please, for those that are watching, remember to nominate yourself or someone in your community that's making a huge impact. We'd love to highlight all the good work that they're doing. Please visit us at nebula.soarcommunitynetwork.com. Thank you, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.